Welcome back to the Raised Hunting Podcast, and that was the name we decided on when we couldn't find a name for it. So, anyhow, today we're going to talk a little bit about not about what these guys were talking about a minute ago, but we're going to talk about the myths of recovering your deer, and I mean not just deer, but recovering animals. Period. And this comes from, I mean, collectively over 50, 60 years of shooting animals and then finding them. And I can tell you that there's times when I didn't do it right, and there's times when I have done it right. I think experience has helped me to start doing it much better than what I used to. But one of the biggest ones that I think that kind of started this whole thing, at least for me, because it created a whole bunch of controversy when we put the show out there, and that was our very first year. We put out a show called Determination, and I shot an elk, and I lost it for 6 days. And people said, why didn't you just shoot another one? Other people said, you should have found that elk in the first day. There was a whole lot of things. People questioned about where I looked and things like that. And people were saying, well, the first thing you should have done was check the river. I did check the river. And that comes from the myth. And that is that when you shoot an animal, it's going to water. And that's just not true. I mean, yes, sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't.
It's not consistent.
It's not consistent, and especially when it comes to other, and I will say there's some tendencies for a whitetail deer that an elk doesn't have. There's tendencies for an elk that a whitetail or a mule deer doesn't have, or an antelope. And you got to understand what you're hunting and what you're facing. A turkey, I can tell you right now, people don't understand how much they will dig up underneath. I've seen them hide in like 6 inches of grass, and you're like, there's no way I'm standing right here. I should be able to find it. But you won't find an elk do that. You won't walk up on an elk buried up in a brush pile somewhere that he's trying to hide. That's not their way.
The
of
size of a horse.
I was going to say, it's a little too big to do that.
I don't care how big the brush pile is. You
Can't
won't see him
me.
in there. He's not getting in a thicket.
He's got a little tiny bush in front of him.
No. So anyhow, so let's talk about this. You guys, I know you heard this from the time that you guys were little. Heard me already saying, I don't know that that's true, that every time someone shoots something, it's going to go toward water. So how many experiences have we had? And we've had some that have gone to water.
Well, I think one.
I can only think of one in the past 22 years of my life where we've recovered it by water.
That was in the river.
Yeah.
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 And I think he was trying to cross the river.
Well, I think you also need to qualify, though, what's the myth? Are they saying that they're going to go towards water, or are they saying they're going to be at water? Because I think if you're just saying it's going towards water, there's a lot of distance between it. You could say, yeah, he's heading towards water.
I think what most people will say is they shoot an animal, and then when they can't find it, it's not an easy recovery. In all these cases, it's something where you can't just walk over to them.
Right.
Okay.
And I think
what
to
they're
give
saying,
people the benefit of the doubt, too, I think there's some people that say wounded animals are always going to water.
Yep.
And there's other people that are saying only gut shot animals
will
go to water. Yes.
Okay.
And I personally don't believe
way.
both. I don't believe either one of them.
Well, let's throw in another. I'm going to go ahead and throw this one in there because we're going to talk about all of them, and that is that they're always going to head downhill.
Yeah.
You know, that's the first thing that you'll hear. I still hear it today. I'll hear somebody tell me, and this comes a lot from all of us now using Christo to run wounded deer. And you'll ask them, which way did they go or what? Well, I lost him right here, but I know he didn't go up the hill. You know, he had to have gone around the side of the hill or back down the hill or toward the creek what we have found is that that's not necessarily the case. The dog's taking us somewhere else.
Oh, you
Or
learn
there's
to
blood.
trust a dog real quick.
Yeah. They don't care. I don't think at all. I think wounded animals, if they're gut shot or it's something where it's going to take them a period of time to die, you're most likely to find them where they're most comfortable. Just like when you shot Juice the first time, we knew if he was dead, we knew where he was going to be. Yep. And he was going to be in about a 10-acre area. And if he wasn't there, we were pretty sure he was alive. What was it, 2 days later?
Yeah, he wasn't there.
And he's alive.
Yep.
So I'm trying to think here of examples. So the one I think Easton's referring to was the one that he shot in Montana. That probably was 20 years ago.
I wasn't 2.
No.
I remember it.
Yeah,
I was
so
probably like 6 or 7. I don't know.
You're telling his age, man. So hold on. Which one are you talking about?
The one that died in the river, and you let me come out
Okay,
with
yeah,
you to
that
get
I
him.
shot. And,
Yeah.
Okay, I gotcha. Yeah, now but okay, so here's a perfect example. I don't know if you guys remember this, but I gut shoot this deer. It comes in, and I realize because he comes in, and right as I'm about to shoot, he turns toward me, and I shoot him quarter two, which I didn't want to do. But anyhow, I knew I hit him. Like, I mean, you heard that sound. I was in everything. We had a video camera, but we hadn't played it back. If you remember, that deer went out in the middle of the field and started trying to breed a doe.
I don't think Easton was with you, was he?
I think
I was.
I think it
with
was
you.
you.
I was
You
just
told
there
me
for
you
the
came the next
recovery.
day. Yeah.
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 But if you remember, he went out in the field and he started chasing does around because then I was questioning, did I hit him?
Yeah.
I was like, I know I hit that deer. And then we went back and looked at footage, and I'm like, how in the world do you shoot an animal mid-body and he's acting like nothing's wrong?
Right.
But anyhow, the biggest thing that I think that people need to understand, and I don't know whether it's a myth or I think it's poor education. It's not a myth. And that is, I'd ask the question to the people, then I'll answer it, because I ask it at every single camp that we've ever held. If you gut shoot an animal, are they going to die? And
Yes.
every single time that I ask that question, 50 kids standing in front of me, 20 of them will say, nope. And those kids are young enough that what I'm hearing is dad, uncle, grandfather, whoever taught them.
Or they just don't know. Some kids
Or they just don't
know.
know. Yeah, but what you're hearing is, and the education part I'm talking about is it's even in many of the state regulation books or the hunter education or the archery hunter education that they go through that tells you if you gut shoot an animal, you need to wait a minimum of 6 hours. It used to be on the test even. And I've personally seen animals that were alive 18 hours after being shot in the guts. Couldn't get up. We luckily found them, but they couldn't go anywhere.
What are they supposed to say though?
But
I mean, you got to give
You
them
gotta-
at least 8 hours is what they're saying. So they can't say 8 hours to 48. Well,
No.
what good does that do?
But what you have to understand, I think, number one, that you have to understand, if an animal's gut shot, whether you shoot it or someone else does, that animal's going to die, unless he finds his way to a veterinarian clinic where they can sew him up. And what he's dying is of septic shock. He's not dying necessarily of your wound and blood loss. He's dying because the bile in his stomach or his intestines leaks out into his body, and it's going to kill him. Okay, and it could take quite a long time. So understanding that, then we understand that we need to do everything we can to find that animal, which puts us in this situation where did he go? Because in that gut shot animal, a lot of times we don't have much blood.
Yeah. So I think first off, I would tell you from what we've learned about whitetails, if you can, I think the reason, maybe part of the reason they say 8 hours is because I think it does vary somewhat. If you're going to have rain or snow and certain factors that
Or
may
heat.
prohibit you from being able to go and look for that animal for a certain amount of time, or heat, and it's going to spoil or whatever. But if you not bump that deer the first time, from our experience, I can't think of very many gut shot deer that went very far on the first time. The only other deer I can think of, too, that went to water, but I don't think that she went to water intentionally, especially because she bailed off a 6-foot bank, was that doe I shot. Dan, and I think is what happened with that one is that Dan got close enough to her that we were running her, and she bailed off this bank on accident, basically, because she was still alive when we got there.
Right.
I don't think that she had
No, I think
ran
that
and
deer
jumped off that bank and then decided she was going to gotta get to that water.
I think that deer was laying on top of the hill. And I think that's where he originally
By the
jumped
CRP,
because the blood picked up after that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I can think of one other one too and I think it was all three of us, which I don't know if we should be telling people what we used to do, but three of us would get in a tree stand together. You remember that when we would have, and I'm not talking about three of us in 3 tree stands. I'm talking about three of us in one tree stand, so that I could take you guys with me. And remember the doe I shot, same place that we're talking about the buck that ended up in the river. We left the doe because we didn't find her right away, and I had learned my lesson: don't push. And we came back the next day, and right on the edge of the river, there was nothing but bones. I mean, the coyotes had stripped that deer 100% clean. That comes to a whole nother part, though, where I'll stand by the statement. I'd rather recover an animal that I cannot eat and put my tag on it than I would not recover them and not know.
Yeah, that's true.
I agree with that. So we got to try and think of other ones that would dispel the fact that they aren't going to water. I can think of one right away, which is that 10 that I shot a few years ago. Glanced off his shoulder, went through
He
guts.
crossed a creek.
Yeah, he
Kept on going.
twice.
Yep.
And
he wasn't thinking about checking up for water.
Yeah, never stayed at water. We found him pretty much bedded up. So that's one.
I tracked one of Brendan's deer last year that he shot next to a pond. The river was like 50 yards away to the north of where he shot it. So from the pond to the river is probably 50 yards apart, or not 50 yards, probably 100 yards apart. And that deer ran straight south, uphill, out into the middle of nowhere with no water anywhere close.
Right.
So it went the complete opposite direction of water and the complete opposite direction of downhill.
Mom's doe that we tracked that time for so long before we had Dan in that grass.
Yep.
That deer wasn't heading toward any kind of water.
That was a mile.
And that was a mile, and we found that deer.
Yep.
And it was laying in the middle of a field.
What about that other one that she shot not too long ago? We have a slow-mo clip of it.
That one I did find near the creek, but that's also I wouldn't qualify that one either way because the creek was right there. The deer, we didn't push the deer, and it only ran 150 yards. I found it bedded.
Right.
But it was not laying like on the bank of the creek
So
or
it
anything
sounds like
that.
in some cases they might end up by the water, whether
Absolutely.
they're trying to or not. In other cases, I don't think there's any coincidence or commonality that they're going specifically to the water.
I think for me, if I was trying to explain this to someone, I would just want someone to understand. Don't go into a situation trying to recover a deer and say, I've looked over here by the water, so therefore it's not dead.
Right.
That's what we don't want you to do.
Yeah.
We want you to say, I've looked over here by the water because they could possibly be here, but then I want to look up the hill. I want to look away from the water. I want to look over fences. I want to look in absolutely every place I possibly can to try to find that animal.
Yeah. Anything you can consider, you should do it. That deer I shot with the muzzleloader this year. So I shot a deer with a muzzleloader this year and waylaid him, made this huge loud smack, and he out cold. And then with that, and then we go in to track this deer, and I'm trying to remember, it was just a little bit of timber pocket that he went down into, and we were getting little bits of blood. I think you cut a little blood that got us into that timber.
Yep.
And then
he went
I
down
was
across
on the exact same trail that you ended up being on, and I literally come to this trail where I would have had to crawl through it. And I told myself, I said, there's no way you went through there, especially if he's wounded, and I just flopped him out in the middle of this field. That deer he didn't go this way. And so I went back and was going across, and then you yelled a few minutes later that you found blood, and you ended up being right where I left. You went another 3 or 4 yards, and so that deer crawled. I don't know how he could have walked through that stuff. I mean, he had to have crawled.
That whole thing that he went through, that 100-yard stretch
Yeah.
there, was
and then he,
hands and knees to get through there. It was,
and then he jumped the ravine.
Yeah, which was not a ravine that I'm like, there's no way that a wounded deer is going to have jumped this.
Right. Yeah, we knew right then. If we found blood on the other side of that,
he's alive.
Yeah, this deer isn't dying because this is some gymnastics BS.
But we still kept going.
Right.
Because we had blood. As long as we had blood, we were going to keep going. Once we got to the point where we had no blood, now we were at a point where we felt like, okay, this deer is probably alive just from the things that he's been able to do.
Yep.
And sure
Which
enough,
was confirmed.
We confirmed it a week later when we get him on trail camera, that he's still there.
What other ones
found
do
a
we
shed.
have? I know there's a whole bunch of other deer that we're not thinking of.
Well, one thing is if you just make good shots,
you
don't have to deal with any of this.
Yeah.
This is all for the shots that are bad. And so kind of going back to a different podcast, don't blame it on your broadhead when your shot is bad. It's probably you that made the mistake, and so therefore now you're trying to find mom shot a heart shot a deer. And when she heart shoots a deer, a lot of people think they're either going to be tipped over or they're not, period. And that deer had one single slice in its heart.
Which I would have put myself in that category before seeing that if you hit the heart, it's dead. There's no possibility that's alive
right.
for any duration of time. After seeing that, I don't believe that.
Right. But that deer was alive for another 10 hours, probably 8 or 10 hours, maybe not quite that long, because we went back because of the storm.
Yeah, probably
that was coming, but probably 8 hours. But the deer was deathly sick,
Only one blade, and then there was constant blood the whole time.
There was constant blood.
So
We just elected to back off and leave, and that becomes that becomes a very critical, especially when it is warm or you got rain coming. You shoot a deer in the evening, and do you leave it overnight or not? And we've had all those things happen. You had it happen on a turkey this year. You had to leave it overnight, and it's beaten up the next morning, but it was way better finding it that way than not recovering. If we had kept going and we thought we bumped it and then you never found it and never knew, you would have felt 10 times worse.
I don't know. Turkey season kicked crap out of me this year.
Turkey season kicks crap out of you every year.
Shut up.
It's true.
That's a whole nother podcast. We could just talk about Warren and turkey season.
Well, we could just show videos of how many misses he had, and it'd be a whole podcast.
Well, he's pretty good at taking
we
feathers
go to that
off
one.
of.
I can contribute lots of information because I've hit them in about every spot that you can
That's
possibly
fair.
hit.
I would agree with that. So the other one, though, is uphill, downhill. That is another one that I think people constantly think that a wounded animal will not go uphill. They won't be able to jump a fence. One of our videographers shot a buck last year that jumped a fence. I watched the video of it. I would have said that deer looks like it's pretty daggone hurt. Its legs didn't look like it had its legs.
There's an arrow in it too, didn't he?
And I don't remember whether it had an arrow in it or
no.
not, but it lived. That deer was alive. So my point is that uphill is not. I mean, and boy, if we start thinking about that one, there's a whole bunch of times when I can tell you that they went uphill rather than downhill.
Yeah,
I
uphill's
would
not
agree
a
with that.
factor at
Not
all. I don't think. And elk, not even considerably a factor.
No. But people need to understand, too, the difference between an elk, antelope, a mule deer, a white-tailed deer, a bear. I guess I would, what am I facing and what are they going to do? And what we're trying to bring to the table here for you guys is not hundreds, but decades of experience of shooting.
Well, it is hundreds of experience because, I mean, you could look at it decades if you just combine our
talking
years.
times,
But
right.
if you take the
Number of
experiences,
hunts,
that's what
number of
really
kills.
matters is the number that it compiles.
And we're not saying we've done them all right. I've flat done it wrong, where I've gone in and I'm positive I bumped an animal. In your deer that you were just talking about a minute ago that crossed the creek twice,
Yep.
the blood that we had at the time, you were younger at the time, you're pushing me, let's go, man. I mean, and we had a video camera that told us, we saw right where the arrow went in. Yeah, this deer should be dead. But when he wasn't dead in 150 yards and the blood was starting to get less, my experience was telling me, leave him alone. And we kept pushing him. And
what made us keep pushing him, for everybody that is listening to this and can't see anything, the entrance hole on that deer was perfect.
Absolutely.
You could not have placed it. You could not have gone on a chart and made it any better than what it was.
I would agree.
So we're watching that on the video, and we see where that arrow goes in. And I'm also, 16, 17 years old. And then we did have really good blood for the first 150 yards.
Like crazy good blood.
I'm thinking even if the arrow glanced, it had to have gone through one lung. So that's kind of that's why I was pushing so hard, is because I'm watching video of an arrow that is hitting this deer absolutely perfect.
Right.
And so on that specific instance, that arrow glanced off of his shoulder blade, or not the blade, the shoulder knuckle, and came out right in front of his back leg. So it was basically all guts.
Right.
It was all guts.
And
in anything.
And that deer was alive by the time me and you got to it, Easton. That would have been probably 10 hours later, because I want to say it was like 5 in the evening.
You're talking about Great Falls?
No, I'm talking about at the house. The deer that
I have
he
no
shot.
idea what you guys are talking about.
Yeah,
Oh,
the-
you're
the deer Warren
10?
shot, and then
Yes.
he had to go to
Oh.
work, and me and you went with Ryan and looked
Yep.
for the
Yeah, he was alive and ready to go.
now. But then and so then we left him after we jumped him the second time. We
We're-
left him alone and said, okay, because obviously the deer was telling us something. He was telling him that he's hurt and he's bedded, and there was a little bit of blood there. There wasn't a lot.
No,
At
where
all. Where he'd been bedded. And so we just backed out. And then the next morning, yeah, it took me and you a couple hours, but we walked right past him. I mean, had we just walked right over there, if we just looked in a different way, we would have found him right away.
Right. We were just grid searching it. But I think that deer, too, if we hadn't bumped him, he'd have been laying right there.
Yeah, I don't think
he
he'd gone
probably
anywhere.
would have been within 200-300 yards the first time if we hadn't bumped him the very first time when
Right.
we
If
thought
we
he was
bumped
dead.
him again.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
So, so the bottom line is, and again, didn't go uphill, didn't go downhill. That deer didn't have to jump any fences.
Well, he went uphill, downhill, and jump fences.
Yeah, I mean, but I guess I'm thinking
And cross creeks.
yeah.
I'm thinking that there wasn't a big hill, like something that he had to top. It was
Not like a super, but Iowa hills. I mean,
oh yeah,
because he went up that hill, then he came down, then he also jumped Ryan's fence.
Yep.
So
The jumping fence is one I don't agree with at all. 'Cause I've seen way too many. I go through fence all the time when we're tracking deer, and they're
yeah.
jumping over.
I don't think deer care. Fences are just so easy for them that it's not a big deal.
unless maybe you broke a shoulder or something like that.
Where they can't use their leg, but
Yeah.
if they're running off, they can probably jump a fence.
The thing that I love about fences is typically it holds them up for a little bit, and you'll find blood. But
Or it can knock something loose, like knock
exactly,
your air loose or something.
or blood shows up on the fence.
Mhm.
That kind of thing.
Yeah. I just don't think they're quite as logistical thinkers as people give them credit for when they're wounded. I think a lot
I think
of
they're
times
going off reaction.
that's what I'm saying.
just
Is I think they
total
just know it hurts
natural.
and they don't know if maybe their body hurts, but they don't really understand why. And that fence is no barrier to that. I like it over there, or that's further away
that's
from
the
what.
last safe spot I knew or something.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, the other one that you'll get a lot of people will say is they'll make a loop. They're making their circle, and I don't ever find that to be the
Making their
case.
circle to what?
Well, my whole thing is I always find that no matter what they do, they're trying to get away from whatever happened, because typically they don't know what happened.
Well, I could believe they maybe are trying to make a loop at some point to come back somewhere they really want to be, but I don't know that.
Are they saying they're going to make a loop back to where they got shot at?
to kind of keep an eye. I don't know what the theory is behind that, but I don't agree with it. Now, what I will say, and I've only seen it on a bear where I physically watched a bear that went. I'm tracking the bear that I had shot. He goes up on top of a ridge, and he turned back, made like a J hook, and stopped right there. And what he did was he got where he could see if anything was following him.
That's kind of scary.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, when I got to the point where I could see him, the only good thing was he was hurt, so he laid down. And when he laid down, I saw him before he saw me. But he would pop up every once in a while and look around and was like, okay, I know I feel like something's here. But I had the wind in my face, so he gave up the wind to be able to see his backtrack.
What bear was that?
That was one I shot in Great Falls, and I did not kill that bear. I ended
really?
up nope.
How?
I hit him way too low, is what I think.
Weren't you sneaking up on him again?
I was trying to get another arrow in him, is what I was trying to do. And finally, we got in a standoff there at 40 yards. It was like 45, and I wanted to be 40 or under, and I couldn't get there because he could hear me in the snow.
Oh.
And that's where. But he had stopped bleeding. I tracked that bear for almost 2 miles.
Just off his tracks.
Just off his tracks, because I had a brand new snow, and so he stopped bleeding within 300-400 yards. So I had a feeling that I didn't have a fatal shot on this bear.
It was a big bear, right?
It was a huge bear.
Yeah.
Yeah, big chocolate bear. Oh yeah, that'll go down as one of my biggest hunting mistakes, and that was all in how I got the shot. I screwed up.
Armpit.
You'll live and you'll learn.
No, I just shot low. Just
Well, that's
shot
what
low.
the cut was probably was
Yeah, it could have been.
armpit
Yeah, I
for
just
the blood.
I know that shot real well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't know if it's quite the armpit.
Yeah, or legs.
Yes.
So they're
Legs
not-
don't do the trick either.
So we don't think they're going to go down. We don't think they're going to make a loop. We don't think they're going to necessarily always go downhill. We don't think that they're always going to go to water, but they could always do all of the above. That's the one thing that I don't want anyone that ever listens to one of our podcasts that says, "Oh, you guys say they always do this." Not the case, man.
They're
I'm
a
telling
wild
you,
animal. They're
yeah,
gonna do what they want to do.
there is, and this is just our opinion. This is what we've seen the most of. Not saying that. I mean, tomorrow you may shoot something and go to the river and it's laying right beside it with water in its mouth, and it might have had to go downhill to get to there.
So I agree then. So what we're saying is you could have one backtrack. You could have one go to water. You could have one. We believe any of that. So now let's take all of those factors out of it, and based on each of our experience, let's say you hit a deer. Brand new place. You haven't hunted it. You don't know really where their really
they're
core
doing.
area is. Yeah, what these deer are doing, what their habits are. You follow them. You get blood for 200 and some yards. You lose blood. Now, what are you doing? Which direction are you going? You going uphill, downhill, water, back, forward? What are you doing?
Depends on where I hit them and how long it's been since I shot.
Okay, so let's just say that it's you're 6 inches up from the bottom of the belly brisket, and you're 10 inches back from the knuckle,
So guts
So you
or
you got
liver
a dead
maybe.
you got
and
a
maybe
dead deer,
slightly quartered. So you
Two
may
or
may have got
two
one
or
lung
away.
or guts.
Okay, so you got a dead deer probably on your hands.
Yeah, he's gonna
About
die.
a 90% chance of, unless, and there's
That's
always
gonna
that
go off whether I
random.
think it's a gut shot or if I hit lungs.
It's not for me.
Well,
What?
Not what I'm gonna do. You asked what are
Yeah.
you gonna do. He
No,
didn't.
wait.
well, after that though, you got to find it now.
Oh, well, I'm gonna follow blood until I can't follow blood, and then
That's
I'm
what I'm
gonna
saying.
start
You're
grid
out of
searching.
blood. Okay, so Easton's gonna start grid searching. But is there a direction you're gonna look first?
Wherever the last blood was in the direction he was going.
I'm gonna.
It's a very broad, open-ended
I
question.
think
you're
what
not
you're looking-
clarifying
Well,
very well.
I don't know
No,
what you're
'cause I'm
looking for in an answer.
I'm trying to give you a realistic scenario. Think of how many times we've had something where, and you have to also think about there's a lot of people they're not filming everything. So it's how many people
Know exactly
here
where
here
they
we go.
hit.
How many people that you tracked for this year had any clue where they actually hit the animal?
Maybe like 2,
Out of how many?
like 15 or 20.
Okay, my point exactly. So you really may not have much information, and then when you were going in tracking most of the time, what were you doing? You were going in basically
Blinded.
blind.
Mm-hmm.
So your gut instincts, at the point where you lose blood and you have nothing else to go off of, but you're confident that this deer is going to die, at that point, what are you going to do? And let's just say, I think grid search is kind of obvious at some point. So let's say, what would you try to do before you put in the time to grid search everything?
I'd probably start. Do I have anybody with me?
Nope.
Okay, well, I'd probably just be starting to do circles to see if I can find any blood in front or behind, or go back and see if I missed anything and redo it again.
Okay.
And then if I still end up at the same spot, then I'm going to start going a little further forward to see if I can find any. If I still can't at that point, you really don't have much of a choice. You got to start looking.
Yeah, you got to mark. You want to have marked something so you got a good baseline of where you're headed, and look at that trail. That's the first. I can't tell you how many times we found a track that wasn't bloody or anything like that, but we assumed that it's probably the same deer. That's the other thing to look for, is things that you find. All of a sudden, you start finding a track, and you can distinguish that track from that animal. But that's the first thing, is marking the last blood, marking something beyond that, meaning that you found closer to get a direction of travel. Now, I agree with Easton. I'm doing half moons or small circles, trying to pick up on blood.
And I'd always be marking last blood, especially alone, because I will never remember where the last blood is.
Well, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm following straight the direction he's gone. Because
That's what I said at the beginning.
Yeah, I
You're
know.
like, huh?
No, I'm trying to give a premise to it. So, because I think that from a lot of the deer animals that we've hit like that, they don't really vary all that much on left and right. Now, they may over time, but it seems like once they kind of pick a direction, they're pretty well headed that direction. And then, if there was any hills or anything, I would first be trying to gain some ground and see if I could see anything. But then I would be doing my grid search
And
along the direction I think he went. I don't know that I would cut back and forth that much, as I would be going more parallel to that trail, first up one side and then coming back the other side.
but maybe we need to clarify when we talk about grid searching, because I mean,
It
there's
wouldn't be grid searching if I'm alone.
Grid searching up by yourself
You really
would be hard.
need somebody, yeah.
that's where, like, OnX or HuntWise or some type of device would tell you what you've covered.
Yeah.
And that's where turning that on and seeing, okay, I've checked this, and this, and then I haven't checked over here, because I can't tell you how many times we have gone on something that we're tracking, and then I go back and look and go,
And we didn't check this.
I didn't check over here. Now, I can't say that I've ever walked over and then found what I was looking for right there in that
Yeah,
spot.
but at least you know.
But at least I knew I covered everything,
That probably would have helped you on that elk
for sure.
to see where you haven't tracked.
The biggest thing I think that I would say too, looking at that, is going off of East and I's experience tracking this last year and other experiences that we've had, is when you are blood trailing an animal, however long you think you're supposed to take to be looking for blood, slow down times like 5, and then you need to look where your last blood was just past that 50 times. Because the few people that I went with, I don't know about you, but they were burning up rubber, and they were either walking on blood or they were missing blood completely. Because
They try to go too fast.
Yeah, you got to slow down.
And
And
walking
most of
on
the
the
time,
freaking blood trail. Holy cow. That
well, I'm
is my
trying to
biggest
think of
pet
too.
peeve.
I think that most animals that have been hit and we've recovered, there's not very many where we completely ran out of blood. Now, there's been a lot where we've ended up on hands and knees for an extended time period.
Or it might be like a speck here, speck there.
Yeah, where the blood trail is really slow going. When I'm talking slow going, I'm talking like you may take an hour or an hour and a half to cover 30 yards.
I would say on the doe that we were talking about earlier, that mom shot,
Yeah.
that's probably one of the best circumstances ever of following blood. That was so minimal. I mean, like every time one of us was like, there is no more blood, then you would either say, I got a speck here, or I would say, I got a speck here.
Yep.
But, I mean, when we're talking specks, we're talking, it's sometimes 15, 20 minutes. It's when your neck is starting to hurt that you've been looking down for so long. If you got your binoculars around your chest or whatever, it's starting to get annoying. That's when you've been looking, that's when you're going to find that drop, that speck. And I will say this, there's probably 1,000 times that I have not seen blood in a 4 to 6 foot area, only to eventually find it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's true.
That'd be one
You look
thing.
over it really easily.
That'd be
sometimes.
one thing I'd suggest too is if you have somebody in your group that just sees blood well, let them go. Because like
Mhm.
Easton and Dad both see blood way better than I do. My eyes, I don't see it very well. So let them have it because they're going to do a lot better job than you will if you have eyes like me.
But I think that's a good point, and but the grid searching, I guess, going back to that, talking about so that someone would understand when we grid search, it might only be 5, 6, 8 feet at a time before I'm cutting left or right or I'm making my zigzag. It's pretty dang close, and then when I've exhausted all of that, then a lot of times what I'll do is I'll go ahead and I'm looking for some kind of an obstacle where I think I would get blood. If there's a ditch or something that they got to have crossed, okay, I know that animal's going to exert themselves. Am I noticing that every time the animal goes uphill a little bit, I get more blood, or every time it goes downhill, I get a little more blood? Then I'm going to try to find a downhill situation or a uphill situation that gives me that. The other one is terrain plays a huge factor, a huge role in what we get for blood or how well we can see that blood. So if I can get myself into I love dry leaves. Dry leaves show blood like no other. I mean,
or that real like dead yellow switchgrass or whatever it is.
Yes.
That and even if it's tall enough to
I think it's just switchgrass, but yeah, it's like when it's yellow and stuff like that. Where you go out west, and I can tell you right now, you can have the best blood trail in the world, and it can be tough to follow on the sage, dirt.
Rocks are awesome though.
Rocks help when they're smooth.
Yeah, I like rocks.
But to relate the scenario you give us, I'm not going to sit there and wonder, okay, I can't find the blood anymore, so now I'm going to default to the myth of migrate to water, migrate downhill. I'm not, like, wherever, like what you said, the direction, wherever that animal seemed to have been going, I'm going to trust that as much as I can at least. I'm not going to sit there and think, okay, I don't find anything anymore. Well, there's water over there. I'm going to start going that way.
Well,
I'm going to try to follow the direction of where.
To clarify that even more, let's just say you get to a point where you've lost blood, pond is behind you, or it's not like the deer's okay. He probably turned around and went back down the hill right here and down to the pond or down to the river. I agree with you. I'm probably, and I can tell you on the elk that when I go back to that, I was not following any myth. I did follow all the myths for like 2 days. 2 days I'm checking every waterway. At the time, I'm thinking it was one of the first elk that I had ever lost. And so I'm using all the whitetail strategies. I'm looking in every little brush pile or every big brush pile, whatever you want to call it. And I'm looking under logs and I'm thinking it's just a bigger deer. He's got, but now that I understand them,
bigger deer.
They aren't going to do that.
Clydesdale.
Yeah.
So what I was doing some days I walked 2-3 miles. I was walking in the wrong direction, but I had nothing to go on. And so what I would look for is what looked like good habitat for an elk, And now what I can tell people that going back on that, because we didn't push that elk. We left. We didn't push him. He stood there for 2 hours and never knew we were there. And we backed out, came back the next morning. The tracks told us that there was a whole bunch of elk came into there that night. And we think another elk pushed that elk.
Him. Yeah.
and that's and probably and honestly, when I ended up finding him, he was 8/10 of a mile away from where I was. I don't think that elk ran there. I think he just walked away from the other elk or someone trying to whoop up on him, and he was like, I just can't deal with this, so I'll just keep walking away till I get away from everybody.
Well, I think your species makes
A big
a
difference.
huge difference. I think if you hit a whitetail in the guts or hit him, wound him, but it's lethal, your chances of recovery is still fairly good in my
Really
eyes.
good.
An elk, I think your chance of recovery is 5% or less, just because the
With
amount,
a lethal or fatal shot?
yeah, and like meaning if it's not
Wow.
lethal right away, just because the country is so much bigger that it's hard for whitetail guys to fathom until they've been out there. That I'm just thinking of Crown Royal, which is a bull that my mom shot several years ago, really big bull, and we spent
4
Thr-
days.
4 days. Was it 4?
4 days.
4 days with, well, there was 3 adults, 3 of us.
4 if you count the cameraman.
Who was
Josh was there.
Yeah, that's right. So four people looking for 4 consecutive days, all day from sun up to sundown, and we had a farmer that stuck that in a plane and flew over it, and we still didn't find that bull. And then he was found later on about, what was it, a mile
He
in?
was right, but we had flown over him.
Right.
We had to have flown over him, and we had to have walked. I think I walked within 150 yards of that bull. But not having any kind of the electronic technology and stuff that I'm talking about, I didn't know whether you had already walked that drainage or mom had or whatever, because
That
I
is
think I
sickening.
actually got within 150 yards of him twice
Ugh.
and didn't know it.
Yeah.
And then the landowner's son found him 4 months later.
And how big was he again?
We're estimating, we don't know because the landowner won't give him back, the landowner's kid.
Yeah, but what do we think? Like
380s.
380?
Yeah, he was a large
Yeah,
bull.
he's huge.
That is extremely sickening.
I do think that at that time, if we had Onyx, we may have found that bull.
Yep,
Because I know the one day we were 3.5 miles from where the shot was of covering ground because we thought we covered everything. Where I think if we'd have made sure that thing using a tracker was painted.
Well, you'd have something to go off of
Well,
instead of just thinking, okay, I don't remember if I walked by this tree or not.
Yes.
But I
having known what I know now, if I'd had Dan, we would have found that
Oh,
bull
yes, for
110%. That my dog would have walked right to that bull,
Yep.
and he was roughly a mile though, as a crow flies.
But
I
that
mean,
just gives you an idea of how big the terrain is.
yeah, absolutely,
Yeah.
That 4 people can be covering that for 4 days straight
and still not
within a
walk
mile
that
and
piece.
still not find that bull. Yep.
yeah, that's pretty crazy.
So I think what we wanted to make sure that we covered is that we're just trying to get people to find their animals, and that means if you've heard those sayings, if it's grandpa, if it's your uncle, if it's, I mean, it could be someone instructing because it's just been taught from generation to generation, that, hey, they're going to do this or they're going to do that. They might. I'm not telling you that they won't, but they might, but they may not either.
Yeah.
And so you owe it to that animal to do absolutely everything you can to try to recover them. I mean, and the other one that would come into play, people ask me, because when I shot that bull that I'm talking about that I lost, and mom did the same thing. She wasn't carrying a bow. But I actually walked up on a bull 30 yards away. I could have killed another elk. I was 4 days in. If I find this elk dead, I mean, he's spoiled. I could have shot another elk. Legally, I could have done it. And ethically, I couldn't get myself to do that. I was like, don't take your bow. I'm not shooting another one. I'm either fine. But I want someone to understand too, I knew that arrow penetrated that animal and killed it. Now, had I been in a situation where I wasn't positive that I had killed that animal, that I think, well, he might have lived, the arrow hit somewhere else or whatever, I probably would have been carrying a bow,
Yeah.
and looking for another shot. So I'm not trying to paint that I'm a saint or a perfect person or whatever. I'm just saying I knew for a fact, though, that where that arrow went in, that animal was dead. No different than the deer you shot that we were just talking about. We knew that deer was not going to be able to live because that arrow went all the way through him.
Right.
I think the best thing you could take out of this entire conversation, or what I've learned the most, especially going off the last year with tracking, doing blood tracking for people, is you walk into a certain situation and I ask tons of questions, as many as I can, to get as much information as I possibly can, especially because a lot of people don't have video of where the shot is. And when I'm going into it, I don't know where that deer went. I don't know if that shot where they're telling me the shot is accurate or not. I have to eventually, one, if you have a dog, trust the dog. But two, my point of what I learned was to trust myself more than take these things that I've heard people try. Do this, do this, do this. There's strategies you can use like grid searching and going back and working it again, or doing your half circles that we're talking about. All these different things you can take for tools to help you find the blood or go and find that animal. But don't allow all these myths or things that people are telling you that a wild animal is going to do to affect where you're going to look. Because when I started trusting myself more, ignore all that other crap. I'm going to do exactly what this animal is telling me in this situation. I'm going to trust, even if it's freaking weird. It might do something that I would never have expected. But I'm going to trust what that animal is showing me and what the signs it's giving me. And I'm going to use whatever tools I have available to me to find that animal. And that would be the biggest tip I could say that I've learned going off of like what we're talking about this stuff, because again, it's a wild animal. It's not going to be doing the same thing every time it has an arrow go through it,
or a bullet.
or a bullet. Yeah,
I mean,
it's not guaranteed that it's going to do anything. So trust your gut and trust what you've learned as far as the tools to be able to find that animal instead of what everybody's telling you or yelling in your ear to do.
Yeah, with you explaining that way, though, you made me think of another recovery that Dan actually did on a whitetail deer that made it 0.8 of a mile. And where the guy that shot it left, where he felt like he was off blood, was when the deer supposedly went out into this wide open field. And he was like, I just can't see that deer going out there. There's nothing out there. Dan blew out across that field like it was nothing. And then he went out in the middle of that field and made a hard right-hand turn. And I was like, at that point, I'm questioning Dan. I'm like,
it's hard not to sometimes.
But I was like, that doesn't seem right. The deer wouldn't have done this. Number one, would he have gone out? And I'm thinking, why would he not stay in the timber, stay in the cover? But he blew out into this wide open field, and then he gets out there and makes a hard right-hand turn. Dan and I hit the timber. When we get to the timber, there's a drop of blood. And I'm like, gosh dang, this dog knows what he's doing, so trust him. And so we kept going. But my point with that is that's another one. It's not necessarily a myth, but a lot of times we think they won't cover a cornfield, a cut cornfield, or they won't go out. Oh, they'll never go out in the wide.
They won't make a hard right turn or
something.
Yeah,
or they won't make that hard turn. And there's one of those instances where I would have been wrong, because if I had got led out into that field, I would have kept on trying to go along the field. I would have had no idea. There was no terrain, no nothing that would have told me right-hand turn right here.
Yep.
What I'm guessing, what I envisioned in my head after seeing that was the deer got out in the field and realized it was out in the wide open, and then was like, oh, let me get out of here, and then cut across.
How many do you know of the ones that you recovered this year? Were you able to find any blood near, meaning once you knew that the deer was dead? I don't know if you were following Christo, you may not be able to look for blood. Were you able to find any blood on the trail near where he died?
Like going back after you found him?
One of them, there was no, I don't even know how we found the deer. Well, he's still alive, and we found it 48 hours later, and that one had no blood anywhere even close until he shot him. He had to shoot him twice again. And then another one I'm thinking of, I could see blood while we were tracking it, and we had lost it. Or the guy that called me, because he lost it for a little bit and couldn't find it, didn't know where else to go, and he was going the complete opposite direction where the deer went. And Christo picked up on where he had last blood, and he went into some random field, and he was out in the middle of this CRP field, and I could see blood on that one. But most of them, no. But I'm also running a lot of times when he's really on it, so. And I don't.
That's something for those guys that are first-time trackers getting into tracking with a dog. Two people is huge. One person running the dog and another person just following where you go to be able to confirm your dog is going the right way. I got a little drop of blood, because, man, if they're on it, like Dan, and Christo goes faster than Dan, but if they're on it, a lot of times you won't know for sure.
Yep.
And that's on a lead. We keep our dog on a lead. They don't run loose. And so having that other person behind you, and it can be the shooter. It doesn't have to be a trained person, just someone that you tell them,
That's
stay,
what I always did.
Stay behind me, follow where we go, and just keep looking for blood. And if you see blood, let us know.
Yep.
I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of a deer or any big game animal where we lost blood completely and then found it. And I'm
Oh.
having a hard time thinking of very many.
I can.
Which one, Eli? My elk. I thought, didn't we find some blood near there though after that? No. Yeah, that was a good one. That's true. So my elk was really weird.
You're saying that you found blood, lost blood, found the animal?
I'm just trying to give people like an idea. Yeah, like a rule of thumb. Like if you lose blood,
Doesn't
and
mean it's not dead.
I
Right.
agree.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that that's the case. I'm
No, I
just
think
saying
that's
what
you're
are
saying,
your.
isn't it?
I'm saying that it could be dead.
Yeah.
But I'm also trying to give people an idea of what your odds are of finding that animal. Because I'm trying to think of how many animals that we've ever had where we completely lost blood and then still found them. And I forgot about my elk in New Mexico, which that bull, Eli and I shot that bull at 10 yards, blood everywhere. I mean, I crushed him. I couldn't hit him any better. Very similar to your elk. And had lots of blood for, I don't know what. It was probably really only realistically like 150 yards. And then he hit this big meadow, and we couldn't find blood in this meadow to save our lives. And then he made it across that meadow, just across that meadow into this edge, which, so realistically, that bull still died probably within
30 seconds.
45 seconds. Yeah, he probably made it 400 yards, just 500 yards, but he did it, at a full clip. So it didn't take him however long it would take an elk to run 400, 500 yards, which I can't imagine would be that long. But other than that, the only other one that I can really even think of was Juice.
That's what I was going to say.
And that was, but that, I mean, he still
was
was
only
dead
150 yards.
Yeah. He was dead within probably 40 yards of the last blood.
Yeah, but, I mean, we didn't. But, again, too, we also probably didn't look that hard because we felt like we knew right where he went.
Well, it was snow, remember?
Yeah, and it wasn't obvious blood, for sure.
I'm just trying to give people like a rule of thumb. Like if you run out of blood, because now that I'm thinking about that, I would kind of like to have that in my back pocket. Like if we run out of blood, we may really be screwed.
I don't know. So the problem is that now that I have Dan.
Without a dog, yeah.
I go back and get Dan, and then typically he finds it. I can think of many times, though. I will say
but usually we pick blood up again.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. The turkey that we tracked the one time at night, you were finding the blood when we jumped my bushy beard.
Oh, yeah. I was on my hands and knees for
Yeah,
a long time on that
and
one.
I can't. I mean, numerous times we were like, we can't find any more blood, and then he would holler, "I got some here," another drop.
Well, that's what I'm thinking of too. I can think of several times that we started Dan again, where we couldn't find any more blood, and he gets going, and then we find blood.
Right.
But I can't think of very many where we had an instance like that and didn't find any blood, and then still recovered the animal.
Well, I think a lot of times too, what can dictate where that's going to be hard is if you've got blood and you've had consistent good blood for a long period of time and it's not slowly dwindling or something like that, or if you've got really good blood and all of a sudden it just stops, you probably still got really good blood.
Yeah.
You're just in a place where you can't find it. It's the terrain that is screwing you up. And you're going to have, whether it goes to like a gravelly rock or something that you can't see it really good. So, I mean, there's just things like that I think that's hard to say.
People could just try to get downwind. Our buddy did. He smelled out my elk. So we had.
He did do it.
He did. Eli and I had been grid searching for this bull for probably. It had been 6 hours. Probably 5, 6 hours. Could not find my bull, and I'm freaking out. I'm like, what the heck? And our buddy gets there and he says, "All right, I'm just gonna get downwind and get up on this rim, and I'm gonna smell him out." And I'm like, okay, this dude thinks he's a dog. This is never gonna work. And freaking 20 minutes. He's on the radio. Got him.
Yeah, I think he called me before. I'm at home, and he's like, I can't find Warren, but I found his elk.
So why'd he call you if you're in Iowa?
Because he just wanted to tell me that he had found it, so in case Warren texted me,
Oh.
because he couldn't find him.
Oh.
You know, everyone was looking. They didn't. He figured Warren doesn't have service, and in case Warren texted me, he's like, "Tell him I found his elk." I was like, "Okay."
I had gotten to the point where in my head, I needed to go where I didn't think he'd go.
Yeah.
So I was going further, and I was going to these weird places, and I was doing this, and I was doing that, trying to think of anything that I wouldn't think of, and that's where I was checking. And sure enough, though, I do think I would have found him if they hadn't messed us up. I think they messed me up, our buddy, because when he came, because I told Eli, we're going to do a grid search really good right around this meadow assuming that he didn't make it very far out of that meadow, no matter which way he went, because we knew for a fact he was not in the meadow. So, and the shot was good enough that he had to have been dead close to that meadow. And so we were basically just going to walk the perimeter of the whole meadow, and we were like halfway through it and try and find my bull. Well, right when he pulled up, he's like, all right, let's do this, this, and this. And right where he was at, we were within 60 yards of my bull. Like, you could have seen him from where we were standing, and that's right where we were going next. So if it had been another 15 minutes before he came there, we probably would have ran right into him.
Novice.
Yeah, I
they
agree.
just don't know what they're doing. You know,
Yeah.
So,
I can't say anything. I haven't
Yeah.
killed an elk.
no, but I mean, and again, that's just one of those scenarios, though, that you think they go a long ways, or you think they didn't go very far. You know, you think I mean, a whitetail deer, a whitetail deer running will cover hundreds of yards in seconds. You know, and same with an elk. When an elk decides it wants to leave, and it's not even running hard, it's just walking really fast, and they cover a lot of ground in a short amount of time. So the one thing is, there is no perfect way to look. There just isn't. You just have to cover absolutely everything you possibly can.
Agreed.
So what else? Did we cover it all as deeply as we wanted to?
Well, we only did one myth, so yeah.
Yeah, I think we
Two.
Kinda.
uphill, downhill,
And
and go into water.
Yep.
All right. Well, we saved some of the other stuff. We touched on a few things there that I'm glad we didn't go into, because I think they can be pretty good topics that we want to talk about. But I do hope that this one, I hope that this one is powerful enough that someone listens to it from start to finish and says that they will employ some of this, and that they will, you know, the next time. And the bad thing is that someone may want to be listening to this too late, when they're like, oh, what do I do now? Because I don't know how many text messages, email messages, phone calls I get in a season. Hey, I just hit this. What do I do?
Think? Yeah.
You know, what's your thought on it? And like you said, you're there even when people have called you and asked you to come there.
Yeah.
This is someone asking me over the phone, what do I think?
Well, so that would be the best tip we could give anybody if there's one to come out of this. If you can, and you have somebody that has a notable dog that knows how to use their dog, and their dog knows how to use their nose, and you're in question of what you're going to walk into, get the dog.
Be smart about who
because
you're using,
that is your best odds. You may run right up to it and it was no big deal, but if you run into a situation where you run out of blood and stuff, the dog is by far your best opportunity.
Absolutely. They are
if they're trained well.
Yeah,
be sure you do your research on who you're picking.
People out here with their wiener dogs running around.
Wiener dog, don't knock the wiener dog. They're good. They may not.
Yeah, but we're just talking about like when people they're just running their house dogs. How many people did you do that?
I had like 2 or 3 people. Oh, I thought my dog might be able to track it.
One,
so
wasn't it like a bulldog?
Yeah, that's the one that was 48 hours old, and Christo still found it somehow with 0 blood to start.
That's impressive.
No idea
That is
how.
good.
And after that dog had been on it.
Yeah, but people just.
I thought that his dog was going to die.
We're going to save that. We're going to save all the dog tip stuff though for another, because to me that's a whole podcast in itself.
I'm just saying, if you're going to be looking for somebody to track, make sure you do your research.
Yeah.
Before
sure.
you pay somebody to come do that.
Yep. But
yeah, it's very worth it. I agree.
Yeah, and because there's things that they can do or not do to give the dog a better advantage.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because you can screw the dog up where even he can't get by.
Yep.
So, all right, guys. Well, we sure appreciate it, and like I said, send in your tips. If you guys got something, we'd love for your comment, your opinion. There's a lot of people out there that may disagree and say they always go to water. You found all 6 of your deer at water. More power to you, but I'm telling you, your 7th one may not. So. What we're trying to say is send in your comments, send in your topics. We'll cover some of the topics. We've started getting some, and we're putting them on the list. And hopefully you guys enjoy what you're hearing. And more than that, I guess more than the enjoyment, I hope that we're helping people be better hunters and better stewards of the land. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you.